I'm not trying to be dramatic here, but I'm actually done with ranked. I'm just gonna play my fucking ult until Riot does something about this. Because I swear to God, this is the most bullshit thing I've ever seen. This is the worst meta. This is the worst top lane it's ever been. I want to get back to the days where Irelia's 2-second stun was the worst of my issues. I want to get back to bitching about Irelia. I don't want to be bitching about fucking tank Teemo.
Why are top laners so damn whiny? If you follow myself or really any other top lane YouTuber or streamer, you've heard it all. Non-stop rants about the tank meta, constant complaining about individual matchups, and plenty of comments whining about how difficult it is for top laners to have an impact on a game. You may agree or disagree with some of these complaints, but the constant whining never seems to let up, does it? Recently, Hshin, an infamous top lane streamer, put out a video describing what he thought was wrong with top lane and what he would do to fix it. Now, some of the things he suggests here are pretty radical, to say the least, and the video garnered a bit of a mixed response, but I personally like the video a lot for two reasons. Firstly, it does sum up a lot of the larger issues and frustrations top lane players have been dealing with in a relatively concise video, but more importantly, Hshin points out something very interesting. It's really hard for other lanes to relate to some of these issues, since these are not issues you see in other lanes. I think this may contribute to why it sounds like top laners have been whining for ages, why you may look down on us or even think that we're just one-trick ponies complaining that Riot isn't buffing our champions. There are some things going on here that are a lot more complicated and detailed than that, and a huge number of problems rooted in how Riot has decided to treat the lane over multiple seasons, so that's what we're going to talk about a bit today. Now, the first thing I think is important to establish here is top lane is a unique role in that it's never been planned out. Like, since Season 1, we've had supports going down bot lane. Supports have never been played in a role other than bot lane. Those champions who are played as support are pretty rigidly defined, and apart from maybe mage supports coming into the meta and being stronger than traditional sports at one point, not much has changed in terms of the champions played in this role. This can be said for almost every single role in the game. The champions in jungle are the champions who can clear jungle efficiently and gank effectively. Mid laners are mages or the occasional assassin that has a lot of burst damage, and AD carries are just ranged AD carries. Again, I mean, you might see changes in how often one champion is played from one meta to another, like Kalista might be a really popular pick bot lane on one patch, while the next patch she's never really seen because she got some nerfs or something, but the pools of the characters that you have to pick from are pretty rigidly defined and rarely ever change, with the exception of if Riot releases a new champion. This is not true for top lane. Top lane not only has the largest pool of viable champions that can be played in the lane, but they're all different from each other in what their archetype is. You can have AD carries, you have tanks, you have juggernauts, you have fighters, you have mages, you have assassins, and you have all sorts of weird champions with kits that are unique to themselves, so much so you can't really throw them in a traditional role. All of these champions aren't played top lane because Riot said, you know, this champion's going to be a top laner, that's how we're designing them. Most of them are just played top lane because players found out, oh, you can kind of shit on every laner with this champion top. This large pool of viable champions is what draws a lot of players to learn top lane and excites them about the role, but how different they all are and how they came to be top laners makes them very difficult to balance, so Riot has never really spent a lot of time trying to do so. Like, according to OPGG, there are 17 AD carries in the game who, for the most part, are somewhat easy to keep kind of balanced. They all fill the same role and work functionally the same as champions who focus on dealing damage through throwing out auto attacks. There is some variety here, and you do see the occasional change like the rune changes, which might make one or two of them overpowered, but for the most part, AD carries can be kept relatively balanced with multiple viable picks that just have different strengths and weaknesses. But top lane has 57 champions that are all regularly played in the lane, and not only that, but all of these champions function differently from each other in a match of League of Legends. Like, Camille is a champion who's classified as a fighter. She might want to fight a little bit in the laning phase, but she really wants to scale up and get some good skirmishes off in the mid and late game, good TP ganks, and maybe some late game split push going. That might be the strategy of what a Camille player thinks about when they decide to play her, whereas a Teemo player is completely different. Teemo is a champion who's going to look to have a really oppressive early game where he's super aggressive, denying a bunch of CS, and then AFK split pushing late game, not really looking to team fight at all. So how would you balance out these two champions. I mean, if you're playing them against each other, then Teemo should win the early game, right? But how hard should he win the early game? At what point does his oppressive laning phase go from being a counterpick to being completely broken and unplayable to play against? It's incredibly hard to balance out these champions because they function differently in game. They have different goals, different objectives, different strengths and weaknesses, even though they're going down the same lane. And if we're just looking at one of these champions like Teemo, how do we balance Teemo out against the 56 other champions he's going to go up against on a regular basis? Riot's solution to this in the past has generally been just to make tanks the best champions and ignore the lane otherwise. This kind of makes sense from their perspective, since most teams need a tank and top lane is a very convenient role to throw a tank down, and tanks can be super impactful in the late game and can always be a good pick, but they can still kind of be bullied out of lane by a skilled fighter or juggernaut in the early game, so that kind of makes things appear somewhat balanced. Tanks are almost always overtuned though to make sure they're the best role top lane. Top laners are always going to complain about this because tanks are the most boring matchups and the least skill expressive champions top lane has to offer, and what Riot doesn't really consider about this balance strategy is there are a lot of matchups that don't involve a tank top. If you're unaware, there is currently this weird hybrid tank Teemo build top lane that is complete bullshit right now for everyone who's not a tank. I don't know how the fuck this exists, if I'm being blunt. How has Riot not nerfed this at this point? But they don't seem to really care since it's not really affecting tank matchups. Riot's solution for balancing top lane seems to be, as long as it isn't ruining competitive play and it doesn't really ruin the game for tanks, it doesn't matter how much it ruins the game for fighters and juggernauts. If you want to deal with it, just pick a tank. This has led to so many impossibly frustrating matchups being played top lane. I mean, whether it's Swain, Quinn, Pantheon, Malzahar, Heimerdinger, or tank Teemo, there's always a few really frustrating matchups that are impossible to play if you're not a tank. Riot's been insanely hands-off with how they balance top lane, which again makes sense, but it leads to so much broken shit that's so frustrating to play against, and it just never ends up getting fixed. They do balance some things out, like Ornn is insanely overpowered right now, and he's hopefully going to be nerfed at some point in the immediate future, but that's generally because he's a tank that's outclassing other tanks, not because he's ruining the game for fighters or everyone else. He's going to be nerfed, but what about tank Teemo, or what about Jace or Malzahar, or whoever is making the laning phase hell for fighters but not tanks? They're never going to be touched, and if they ever get nerfed, it's not going to be for months. But I will concede it is difficult to relate to top laners and their frustrations if you mainly play roles in League other than top lane, since if you were to hear these complaints in relation to your main role, it would likely be coming from a bronze one trick. When you hear Vayne one trick complaining that Vayne isn't good right now, that's kind of their fault for one-tricking Vayne. They could probably win matchups if they were a little better as a player anyway, and they could just pick another 80 carry similar to Vayne and expand their champion pool. There's a million things that player could do to fix their issue. It's not Riot's job to fix it for them. When you see Hoshinshin or myself making complaints like this about top lane, it's easy to have a similar thought process. Oh, he's just a Jax one-trick. Oh, he's just an Aurelia one-trick. They're just complaining because they want their one-trick champion to be better than what they currently are. That's not quite it. It's not that we want our one-trick champion to be better, it's that we want fighters as a whole to be not even better, but just playable. I mean, I would gladly have Aurelia removed from the game if it meant I could successfully play Jax, Camille, Rumble, Kennen, and maybe Darius every game without having to worry about laning against Ornn or that stupid tank Teemo build. How has this not been nerfed? It's an entire class of champions that are suffering right now, not just our one-tricks, and these counterpicks that I'm mentioning here, like tank Teemo, they aren't just counterpicks similar to what you might see in other lanes, like let's say mid lane. You know, Corki can kind of get counterpicked by Xerath, but you can probably still outskill a Xerath if you're Corki. If you're good enough as a player and you play the matchup smart, you can probably still win the lane or at least survive the laning phase. But top lane, these are counterpicks that are so easy, you can literally have a gold 1 player beat a diamond player if he gets a Pantheon top lane or a Teemo top lane into a favorable matchup. I mean, these are counterpicks where you rely on your jungle to do something. That's the only way you can ever really come back in this lane. And oh, look, you have a Shyvana jungle. Guess you'll lose the game. Now, I won't lie, these are tough problems to fix, which is why Riot has been so bad about fixing them. 57 champions in a lane is not easy to balance. I sympathize with whoever has to deal with figuring this mess out, but it seems like Riot is just kind of saying, top lane isn't a very popular role, So just fuck them. I mean, that's what it seems like. You can do a little bit more than that. That's why we complain so much. That's why we always rail on how frustrating the tank meta is, why we seem so damn whiny, because we have problems in our lane that Riot just doesn't seem to care that much about fixing. They're hard problems, but it seems like Riot's responses are stuff like Bramble Vest. Let's make tanks' lives even easier and make everything even more impossible for players who don't want to just play tanks. I mean, yeah, I don't know if I can explain it any better than that. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching my video. Shout out to my Patreon supporters for making videos like this possible. I appreciate all of you. This is the first month we've done our Patreon, so I hope you guys are enjoying the rewards, the podcast, and everything for those of you who are supporting me on there. Anyway, if you made it to the end of this ramble, I appreciate you giving me the time to state my opinions, and thank you very much for hearing me out. You have the comments if you'd like to state your own opinion, and if you disagree with me, that's perfectly fine. I'd love to hear your opinion. But again, until my next video, thank you very much for watching. Good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.